Alright, I'm gonna count to one, and you're gonna do your thing on one. On one, okay? Alright. 3, 2, 1. Who's your favorite Marvel superhero? Mine is Uzara Pekora. Remember the quote? Hinokami? Just kidding. I'm pretty sure most of you have already seen the Demon Slayer movie. And as a person who has read all the manga, I gotta say, the visual effects of the anime really made the fight scenes a lot more exciting and beautiful and fun to watch. So today, let's make one of those visual effects in Blender, which is the Hinokami Kagura sun breathing trail effect. So now we are in Blender 4.5, and then first thing, make sure the render engine is Eevee. And then scroll down to color management and make sure the view transform is set to standard, so the colors you see in the render is the same as the colors you choose in the shader. The next thing, go to edit, preferences, and make sure under add-ons that the node wrangler is turned on. It's just a huge quality of life add-on that's gonna help us when we build the shaders. So just make sure this is always turned on. It's gonna help a lot. And next, what I'm gonna do is to Shift A, create a plane. And this plane, I'm going to scale it on the y-axis for a little bit, just like that. And then Control A, apply the scale. And just add a few loop cuts by going into edit mode and Control R. Just add some geometries here and there. And that's pretty much enough. And next, let me go into edit mode and go to top view. You can also press 7 on the numpad to go to top view. And let me hit U, project from view, bounds, and just unwrap this plane. Let me go into the UV editing. You can see this is our UVs right now. That's what we need because it's gonna help a lot when we build the shaders. So let me go into the shading tab and then let me add a new material over here. And you can call it whatever you want. You can call it like fire, Hinokami Kagura. Now let me delete the principled BSDF. And we are going to start creating the general shape of the fire. So let me go ahead and Shift A, input texture coordinate. And what I'm gonna use right here is the UV coordinates. So Control Shift, left click until it goes to the UV. And we are going to use a converter separate XYZ. And we are gonna use the X-axis over here. And just in case, if you initially scaled your plane along the X-axis, you might have to use the Y-axis instead. But if you followed my exact steps, just use the X-axis over here. And let me go ahead and Shift A, converter color ramp. And what I'm gonna do is to add one more point in the middle, just like that. Change it to white. And then the two handles on the sides will be black, just like that. And let me just change this to ease, just so we have a smoother gradient. And let me just bring these two handles closer to the center, just like that. And this way we have the general area of our fire that's gonna be in the middle, just like that. And that's pretty nice. So now let me just Shift A, texture, noise texture. And we're gonna combine the color ramp and the noise texture together to create the fire shape. So what I'm gonna do is to first grab a Shift A vector mapping. And let me just plug the UVs into the vector and the vector into the noise vector. And let me Control Shift left click on the noise texture and just take a look at how it looks like right now. And then we can go ahead and Control Shift right click on the noise texture and bring it up to the color ramp to mix them together just like that. And right here for the blending mode, we want to use soft light. And now let me add a color ramp after the noise texture before the soft light, so converter color ramp and just put it here. And now I can just change the shape of the noise texture for a little bit, just like that. And now it doesn't look like anything yet, but if we Shift A, converter color ramp and put it after a soft light and change this to constant, we can kind of extract the shape of the fire just like that. And we can move the color ramp around after the noise as well. And then we can also change this to 4D. And of course we can use the W value to animate this noise later, just in case. But play around with the scale and also detail level. If you want a little bit more detail, increase the detail and the roughness. But I don't want too much, so just increase by a tiny bit. Adjust the scale. And next I want to break up this entire shape a little bit more. So let me add another noise texture. So Shift A, texture and noise texture. Put it below everything. And then plug that mapping vector into the vector. And then let us take a look at this noise texture. It's just the default one. And what we can do is to multiply this noise texture onto the color ramp over here. So Control Shift right click and drag the noise texture and drag this onto the color ramp after everything, and change this to multiply and just turn it to 1. And technically we can control the contrast of this noise texture with a color ramp as well, but right here I'm going to instead use a converter math. And I'm going to set this to greater than. And this way I can also achieve the same effect of a constant color ramp, black and white, just like that. And I can adjust the threshold a little bit, and I can control the scale and roughness and detail and all that, of course, just to break it up a tiny bit. But don't overdo it, or else it will just kind of, the holes will be too big and it's not going to be connected. You don't want too much of that, so just around 0.3 to 0.4 is kind of perfect according to my experiment. So now what we want to do is to remove the black background. So what we can do is to Shift A, shader, emission. Just put it aside, don't connect to anything just yet. And then Shift A, transparent BSDF. So now we want to mix these two together, but make sure the emission is at the bottom or lower than the transparent BSDF. And Control Shift on the emission and drag it onto the transparent BSDF. This way we can create a mix shader with the transparent BSDF on the top input and the emission on the lower input. And then we can plug this multiply into the vector. And then Control Shift, click on the shader. So this is how it looks like right now. We have removed the black background, which is really nice. But I also want to add a little bit of extra detail. So let me go ahead to the bottom again and just add one more noise texture. And we can plug the mapping into this new noise texture as well. And then Control Shift right click on this new noise texture onto the multiply. But this time I'm going to set it to add. And then turn it all the way up. And then Shift A, converter math, and put it after this noise texture. And then we want to set this to less than instead of greater than. And now we can play with the threshold just to make sure we have these little bubbles and sparks around the fire, just like this. And now if I go to the mapping node and click on the Y, drag down to the Z, we can just drag this around and see how this looks like when animated. But we are not going to do the animation for now, so let me set them back to 0 for now. That's what we're going to do later. So this is our basic shape of the fire, right? And we're gonna basically stack multiple versions of this same texture on top of each other to create the fire. So we can have the red and the yellow and all the black lines in between. So now I'm going to group some of the nodes that are gonna be reused later. So we don't have to duplicate all these nodes multiple times, and we can just keep everything clean by grouping some of the layers. So let me drag away the separate XYZ, the mapping, and also this first color ramp after the separate XYZ. And then of course the transparent and emission, drag them to the side. And what we are gonna group together are these nodes so you guys can take a look. These nodes that I selected will be grouped together. So Control G. So now this is our node group. And if I hit tab, I can go back into the outside and we can just bring the nodes back together. So it looks a little bit more cleaner, just like that. And you can see these nodes are still plugged into the node group and then through the group input into the corresponding nodes. So that's pretty handy. I can tap in and out, right? And then since this input called A is actually the separate XYZ color ramp. So I want to change the name of this real quick. So let me hit N and we can see the group settings over here. And I'm just gonna call this XYZ color ramp. Just like that. And hit N again to hide this. And let me tab back out because now we can start stacking different layers together. So now what I'm gonna do is to just duplicate the color ramp and the node group. So Shift D and make a new copy just like that. And then I'm gonna plug the mapping vector back into the vector. And then the X from the XYZ back into the color ramp. And now we have two same textures, right? But what I can do is to actually shrink the area of the second one a little bit. So what I can do is to bring down the black handles, bring them closer actually. So I can kind of shrink the area for a little bit from the outside. And actually we can hit tab into the node group. And remember all these threshold values in the greater than and the less than. We can drag them out just like this into the group input just like that. And we can create some new inputs so we can control them from the outside. So let me hit N again. The first value is the greater than and the second one is the less than. So we can control these values from the outside just like that. And now for the second node group, I can turn up the threshold for the greater than. So just increase it for a tiny bit, maybe to 0.4. And then the less than value, we can decrease it, but just a tiny bit, maybe to 0.318 or something, because this value is relatively sensitive. 317 perhaps. So if we take a look, we have shrinked the area for a little bit. So now I want to stack these two layers together, the smaller one and the bigger one. What I'm gonna do is to Shift A, color, mix color. And then what I'm gonna do is to put this node group, take this into the factor, the first one into the factor. And if I Control Shift click onto the mix color over here, and then I can change the colors, you can see this is the way we can control the colors of different areas. With the black and white, we can change the color to other colors. So let me change both of them to black actually. Because this node, after the first node group over here, it actually doesn't do anything. But it's here to make sure you can read this entire node setup a little bit easier. So I'm just gonna leave it here. So what I'm gonna do is to duplicate this mix node, and the output of the second node group is gonna go into the factor of this new mix node. And the previous mix node is going to go into the A color. And then the B color, we can change it to something like red, perhaps, or orange, red. And then we can plug the result into the emission color. And let's take a look at the mix shader. And this is how it looks like right now. And we can just repeat this process until we have the inner parts of the fire as well. It's pretty simple. So what I'm gonna do again is to repeat the process. Let me select the color ramp and the node group, Shift D. So now we have these, plug the separate XYZ X output into the color ramp again, and the mapping vector into the vector. And then let me Shift D this mix node, and then just like what we did for the last layer, the result into the factor, and then the last mix result into the A, and then the B, we're gonna change it to black because we want those outlines around the center yellow part as well. And then plug the result into the color, and then we can shrink this new layer for a little bit. So bring down the black handle for a little bit, and then the greater than we can increase by a tiny bit to 0.43 perhaps. And for the less than, just decrease it by a very tiny bit again. So 0.315 is okay. Lastly, let's create the center core part, the yellow part. So Shift D, these two nodes again, and then plug back those input into the corresponding places, and then Shift D, the mix again. Let me bring these over a little bit, and then the last mix node result into the A, the node group into the factor, and then the result into the emission. This time, let me change this color of the B to yellow, just like that. And we can bring these closer, just like that. And also control the greater than, of course. And then the less than a little bit. Just a little bit, just like that. 312. And then we have this fire effect already. It's pretty nice already. So let me go ahead and tweak the mapping node for a little bit. If I move the Y and Z location, just like what I did, it kind of looks pretty nice already. So now you can see some of the parts, it's kind of straight around here. So we can go back into the node group, and then we can just tweak some of the colorams for a little bit. So the shape is a little bit less straight, just like this. Just tweak around the colorams a little bit. And if you want a little glow around your fire effect, what we can do is to go into the compositing, hit use nodes, and then I'm gonna shift a filter glare, and then I'm gonna change this to fog glow. Let me just make a new window on the side over here, and then I can change this back to the 3D viewport, and then I can hit this arrow over here, and under compositor I can hit always. Let me just go ahead and inside the glare I can change highlight threshold, just like that. And you can see it kind of starts glowing, and it's pretty nice. And before, you can kind of just hit glow around the scene settings, but right now you have to use the compositor, or you have to use something like After Effects to add the glow by yourself. And in my case, in my opening animation, I used After Effects, but if you want, you can also use this glare node. Within the compositor, it also worked, but you might have to composite and control which part of your scene is going to be glowing. So what I want to do right now is to limit the area of the fire, so perhaps it's bigger around the tip, and then towards the tail it kind of shrinks. So what I want to do is to go into the node group again. And what I'm going to do is to add a Shift A texture gradient texture. Let me Control Shift on this. I'm going to change this to spherical. And then with this node selected, I'm going to hit Control T to add back those mapping nodes, and I can use the UV again. And what I'm going to do is to perhaps scale the gradient texture to something like perhaps 1.5. So if I go ahead and select the X location, and then I'm going to say minus this scale value, so 1.5 divided by 2, it's going to be centered back, right? It's pretty nice. But maybe I want to scale this up along the y-axis again. So I have a little tail towards the end, just like that. I can hold shift to fine tune the value. Perhaps I want something just like this. And what I can do is to shift a texture, noise texture, and then I can kind of control shift right click onto the gradient texture, of course. Click on the noise texture, control T to bring in the mapping nodes in case we want to adjust the mapping. And then what I can do is to change this to soft light as well. And I'm gonna turn up the factor to 1. And then let me add a shift A converter color ramp after this noise texture. And then I'm just gonna, just like how I did with the initial gradient, I'm just gonna play around with the gradient for a little bit, just like this. And of course, I also want to have a color ramp after that spherical gradient texture. So let me just perhaps bring the white closer for noise texture, adjust the scale, the detail, the roughness. And then what we can do is to shift a converter color ramp again and put it after all these nodes. Actually, I want to replace this color ramp with a greater than node. So let me delete this color ramp and shift a converter math. Let's replace it with a greater than node, just like this. Apologize for that. Okay. And then actually we can take this threshold and bring it into the group input as the third input. And I can just change the name of this socket to maybe clip or mask, something like that. So we can adjust it from the outside. So what I'm gonna do is to control shift right click on the greater than and drag it on top of the add node. So we can mix them together, and I'm going to change it to multiply. Turn the factor all the way up, just like that. And this is how it looks like right now. And we kind of trimmed some of the end parts away. And of course, connect the multiply result towards the result. And let me go back outside and take a look at the mix shader. So this is how it looks like right now. And now we can just adjust this new mask input of our node group. So let me increase the second one a little bit. And then maybe something like 0.81. And then maybe 0.83. And then 0.84. Maybe it's a little bit too much for the first one, so let me just go ahead and change that back. So now it looks like this. It kind of gets trimmed around the end. So let me play around with the Y and Z location of the mapping again, just to see how it looks. That looks great, but you can see that overall shape isn't really changing, right? So let me tab back into the node group. This shader is pretty complex, so I kind of get lost in the middle as well. Apologize for that. But right here, we can actually, instead of using those mapping nodes, I can directly plug this vector input into this last noise texture inside the group. So it's delete those two mapping nodes and just drag this first vector input directly into this noise texture. So this is how it looks like right now. If I go back out and if I play with the Y and Z, now it changes that mask as well. In places like this, it looks a little bit too rounded. So what we can do to adjust it is to just play with the color ramp even more. To just shrink it. Play with the noise a little bit more. So this is our Hinokami Kagura effect. I can just animate it by moving this mapping Y and Z around, just like what I did. Let's say I want this entire animation to be automated. So what I can do is to just switch, let me set them back to 0, the Y and Z values. And let me just hover my mouse over the location and hit I to just add a keyframe. Get ourselves another window, and let me change it to graph editor. And I'm gonna click this mapping node. Make sure you stay in the shading view, because you might not be able to see these keyframes from outside. So let me click on the mapping node, and you can see on the graph editor we can now control these locations from the graph. What I can do is to go into the Y location, and I'm gonna click on modifiers on the right and add a generator. And what's gonna do is to just create a graph over time. So now the fire kind of moves itself, but it's a little bit too fast. So what I want to do is to lower this value a lot. And I also want it to be negative, because let's say I set it to positive value, it's gonna be moving towards this side. If that's what you want, of course you can use this value, but let me set it to a negative value, so it's kind of moving away from the tip, just like that. And perhaps a little bit more slower, I can go 0.005 minus. Okay, so it kind of moves like that right now. And same thing for the Z location. Add a generator on the modifiers, and then I'm gonna just set this to a really small value. It doesn't matter whether it's negative this time. And I want it to be a little bit more slower, so 0.004 perhaps. This looks pretty nice. So now this keyframe of the mapping node is done through the graph. And this is how it looks like right now. And that's pretty nice. So now let me just very quickly create something like a sword or a katana. And maybe I'm just gonna make a stick just like this, because you guys will get it. Okay, let me put over the end of the fire. Let me just attach this. Let me just scale this up for a little bit. So for a better effect that is closer to Demon Slayer, I usually put this fire on top of the blade, just like that. So just in case you want to animate this fire trail, what you can do is to hit tab into edit mode, select this vertex around the end of the fire, around the tip, and then shift S and cursor to selected. So now the 3D cursor sits on top of this tip over here. And then we can go back into object mode, shift A, armature single bone. And then I can select this upper tip right here, and then shift S, selection to cursor. And then G, Y, bring that tip back out just like that. Now we have a bone, we can select that bone and then right click, subdivide multiple times. I'm just gonna subdivide 3 times for demonstration, but if you want it to be finer, of course. So, and then I can just go ahead and click on the plane and then shift click on the bone, control P, and let's say with automatic weights. So now all I have to do is to just animate this bone. And then I can parent this bone onto the katana. So click on the bone and then shift click on the katana or this stick that I have over here. Control P, object, keep transform. So let's say this is your katana. You can just move it around right now and the fire will follow. And you can use this, you can just animate the end bones just like that. And you might have to weight paint this for a little bit, so these 3 bones will not affect this tip at all. I'm not gonna go too deep into weight painting and rigging and stuff in this video, but just as a quick demonstration, you can now just adjust these bones and control how it curves and all that, of course. So let me perhaps demonstrate. Let me hit I on this first bone. Let me make it really small, just like that. And then play a few frames, extend it, hit I again to add another keyframe. And you can do something like this as well. But I like to reduce the stretching as much as possible. So in my animation, I just made it static without all these armature and parenting and all that. But if you want to do it, this is one way to do it. So if you think the glow isn't strong enough, you can also go into the colors. There's this trick that I use is to just go into the value. The maximum is 1, right? But you can actually input a number larger than 1. And you can make it a lot more brighter, just like that. In the center as well. If I say 3, it's going to be really, really bright. So this is something you can do, you know, play around with the values and all that. But there you have it. This is our Hinokami Kagura effect. And I hope you guys find this video useful, and I hope you guys are going to make use of this little trick and apply it onto your perhaps Demon Slayer 3D fan art or anything. So thank you so much for watching, and I am going to see you in the next video.